Hi, I'm Shannon Watkins, and I'm here today with Neetu Arnold. Neetu is a research associate at the National Association of Scholars, and her research focuses on student debt and administrative growth. She recently authored the report Priced Out, What Colleges Cost America, and she's here today to talk with me about her report. Neetu, thank you very much for speaking with me today.
Pleasure to be here, Shannon.
All right, wonderful. So to start off, let's just get a general background on your report. What was the impetus for doing this research?
Yes, so my report looks at the financial habits of 50 universities across the country. And we wanted to look at a couple of issues. We wanted to look at the issue of student debt, growing college administrations, and rising college costs. And we wanted to show that this was an interconnected issue, that each one affects each other. And so that was a reason we wanted to look into this issue. And so we used information from the Department of Education. We also filed information requests, and we really just wanted to see how universities are spending their funding and how this affects students and their education.
Great. Can you speak in a little bit more detail about your methodology? What schools, you said there were 50 of them. What are some names?
Yeah, so we looked at public universities, private universities. We specifically focused on four-year institutions, given that most college students attend those universities. And so some universities include the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. We have Cornell University, which is my alma mater, and we have some small liberal arts colleges in that mix as well, including Berea College in Kentucky. And we just wanted to see whether there is a difference based on their public or private status, whether they're religiously affiliated, or even based on their U.S. News ranking, maybe how their research funding is affected. And so we really wanted to get a broad overview and to look at various colleges to get a better sense.
Oh, that's really interesting. So what were your findings? And was there anything that surprised you?
Yeah, so I think among our public universities, so we looked at 26 public universities, a claim that's often made is that these institutions have to increase their tuition because many states have cut public funding towards higher education. And at least in our sample of the public universities, that wasn't the case for the most part. In fact, increases in tuition far exceeded losses in state funding. And so I thought that was a little bit interesting. Now, this isn't to say that there aren't schools that could be affected by state funding cuts, especially if they're heavily reliant on them. But it was an interesting finding to see. Something else we looked at, as mentioned earlier, was growing college administrations. I'm sure you know it as administrative bloat. And so one thing that we try to do in the report is provide a precise definition. So we look at the wasteful expansion of spending on administrators and staff. And so what we found at our universities was that there was a 50% increase in the number of administrators and staff at our universities, and many of those increases usually are in the executive areas. So that might include deans, provosts, managers, and other professionals. That category usually includes engineers, business officers, social workers. It's very broad, if that makes sense. And when we took a closer look at some of our other universities, we really found that there is this increased focus on externally facing roles. And what I mean by that is these are roles that are usually used to increase the brand of the university or their influence in their local communities. And so we saw an increase in, government relations, public relations, marketing roles. And so I thought that was interesting, because my concept or understanding of a university is that it should be focused on instruction of students. And the fact that they are expanding resources in areas that are not so much related to student education, I think that was interesting to me.
Oh, yes, and I'm sure concerning for you and for anyone learning about your findings. Uh, so these are some factors that higher education leaders will say, well, this is why we have to charge more money. I believe you just listed a couple. Were there any other reasons that you found for, oh, well, we have to charge increased prices because of this reason? Were there any other ones that you found?
Yes, so we actually interviewed college students, even graduates, people who took an untraditional post-education secondary path, parents, and college administrators from across the country. And with my interviews with the college administrators, something that came up a lot was spending related to federal and state regulations. And I think there is something to be said about that. There is quite a bit of entanglement with various regulations. Universities may have to report on, how many crimes are on campus, to whether they're following Title IX or following diversity requirements. There was actually one instance where a college president uh, didn't really want to hire a Title IX administrator just because they already had some staff in that area, because of some federal regulations during the Obama administration. They were kind of required to, and this administrator told me that instead of hiring a professor, I have to hire this staff member. And so I think there are situations where you have administrators that are just put they're kind of put in a hard place, but that isn't where all the increases are occurring. And I think it's interesting that a lot of administrators like to discuss how many regulations they have, but in some cases they are making their own decisions, such as investing in your lazy pool, or at least in it. Something I found was that at West Virginia University, they have a wellness director who earns 6 figures and kind of focuses on installing zip lines in adventure courses. And so in that sort of case, I think that is more of a personal decision that isn't related to education.
No, absolutely. That is, oh my goodness, that's shocking. Okay, so these are what higher education leaders will say influences the driving costs of higher education. And yeah, there might be something to it, but what do you offer as the primary driver of costs in higher education nowadays?
Right. So we actually go through several things that could be contributing to the rising costs. And just to name a few, it is the growing number of college administrators and their priorities in areas such as social justice, globalism, sustainability. And one thing readers will find in our report is we do provide kind of a sampling of administrators and their salaries. And some of these compliance officers, they may, again, compliance may be required for certain things, but I think to a certain degree it's become overload. You might find diversity deans or compliance officers that are earning easily 6 figures. There are people working in global affairs that, again, are easily earning 6 figures. And so, those are some of the areas to keep an eye out for. I'd also pay attention to words that say innovation and entrepreneurship. That could, usually these areas are focused on research or economic growth in local communities. And right now, I probably sound really bad if I say those are bad things. I'm not actually saying that, but usually there's a different component to this. So for example, we looked at the University of Maryland's Academy of Innovation and Entrepreneurship. And that is one of the fastest growing departments within, I think it was within student affairs. And they inculcate a lot of social justice and diversity and activism courses into the course material, and it falls under innovation and entrepreneurship.
Wow.
And readers can look into that more in our report. Again, I found that pretty shocking that there was a course, I think it was called what was it? Engineering for Social Change. And in my head, I was just thinking social engineering. So, there are things like that where it falls under innovation. And to me, that doesn't really seem related to economic growth or helping a community. It seems more about influencing the perceptions of people in the local area. And so that's why we ask that, anything that's ideologically driven should be looked into better.
Oh, absolutely. And in your report, I know you mentioned and you discuss the Bennett hypothesis as playing a role. Could you elaborate on what the Bennett hypothesis is and what its role is in the cost of higher education?
Yes, so we actually go through a couple of theories that might explain why college tuition has risen over time. And one of those theories is the Bennett hypothesis. It was proposed by William Bennett in a very famous New York Times article during the Reagan administration. And he suggested that the student aid system may be incentivizing colleges to increase their costs because they know that students have access to the aid. It makes it more affordable for students up front, especially students who may not have been able to afford college. Otherwise, they now have funding up front, and specifically the student loan system makes college a viable option. But again, I think as we know, the student loan system is a bit deceptive because you do have to pay back that money at some point. It's not like a grant where you can just keep the funding. And so that was his idea. Now, the support for it is difficult. Earlier, there just wasn't that much information. There's limited information and limited time to look at student loan data. And so the results were mixed. But over time, we've had more access to information. And there are a couple of studies that support this. And so I think the only problem is you can't really see causation. And so you're just relying that this could be true. And unless you have an administrator that outright says, we're using the student aid system to increase our costs, otherwise you don't really have just that concrete causation. So, I think the Bennett hypothesis is probably the most reasonable of all the theories that we do go through, though this isn't to say that the other theories may not be contributing in some manner.
No, of course. What are some of those other theories?
Yes, so we went through state disinvestment. I call that cheap states theory, which is where a lot of colleges will say they had to increase their costs because there were cuts in state funding. Another theory that is there is college earnings premium. So this is where they'll say that getting a college, it's a difference between the earnings with a college degree and a high school degree. And so the argument is that a college degree is simply more valuable because it opens up more opportunities and there are better salary outcomes than those with a high school education. Now, the premise of that, there's some truth to it in that those with a college education typically have more opportunities and their salary outcomes might be better. But we've seen over time that the gap between college earnings and high school earnings has actually been decreasing over time. Part of the reason is because so many students, so many college graduates have debt that they must pay off. And so even if they have a high salary, they're still they're still having to pay off their student loans versus the high school graduate who did not have any obligations to pay off their loans because they didn't take out any. And so they have an opportunity to, start building their wealth, starting their families, and, that's what they can do.
That's so interesting. Were there any other theories that you examined in the report?
Yes, there's Bowen's revenue theory, and then Baumol's cost disease. And Bowen's revenue theory basically says that that colleges are like these cookie monsters. They are simply going to spend more. As long as they have more money, they will spend more. And Baumol's cost disease will say that we have to increase the salaries of administrators and staff and faculty because, they have to compete with other sectors. And in order to keep these employees, they need to be able to compete with the marketplace. Now, I will say with Baumol's cost disease, one thing that it makes it seem as if colleges are slaves to increasing salaries. And again, various studies have found that it's more the increasing costs are more related to colleges' own decisions than simply being slaves to increasing salaries.
That's so interesting. Okay, so my question now is, what can be done? What are some practical ways to decrease the cost of higher education and relieve the burden that is placed on so many students?
Yes, so one practical way, this is not so much policy as it is advice from the students and parents that I interviewed. A lot of them said that it's important to look at the cost of college, look at, be prepared with how much you could pay and have a plan ahead of time, and really look at what kind of majors you want, what kind of job opportunities are out there. So I think that was a big advice told to me by a lot of people. And if you can work, make sure you can work and go to school to make that affordable. Now, this is more of advice to work within a broken system. And so I think we do need some fundamental policy changes. We need to offer alternative options to higher education, ones that are more cost and time efficient. And so one recommendation that we propose is that universities offer a vocational track. So this would be in addition to the traditional four-year degree. Some people need the traditional four-year degree. Maybe they're going into academia or research and they need high-level skills. But some people are looking for mid-level skills. They need some higher education, but they also need some work experience. And so that's what the vocational track would provide. It would be about 2 to 3 years long. This may apply to programs such as journalism, elementary school education, fields where, as I said earlier, you need a combination of both. And then we also do support short-term programs and apprenticeships for people who either need lower skills or they simply need work experience and on-the-job training so that they can do well at their jobs. So that's one idea we have. We also need universities to cut down on their costs. And so we ask that duplicate roles or departments, those can be cut down easily. For universities that are truly struggling financially and they don't really have too many options left, consolidation might be an option. I know that's considered controversial just because you are cutting a lot of, you're cutting a lot of departments and roles, but sometimes you have to make those decisions if that's the situation you're in. And then the one other thing we ask is that we want more information transparency. So one thing that was a struggle during my research was finding exact salaries, and especially salary data, even from the Department of Education, looking at the salary data for various universities over time. And we know that public institutions are sort of obligated to have that information available, but we'd like to see it in a more centralized form. And so I think it would be nice if each state had an online database. I know North Carolina has one for for the current year, and that was very helpful. And so it would be really nice if we had access to this information for both the current years and the previous years, so that we can look at how spending has changed over time, if it has, and it might lead to better policy recommendations.
Oh no, I could get behind that as well. That'd be wonderful if the universities were more transparent in that way. Wonderful. Neetu, is there anything else that you would like to highlight about your report or your findings or recommendations, anything else?
I just recommend that people read the report. I think it gives a very comprehensive overview of everything that's happening in our higher education system. And, you know, it really does try to humanize the issue and show that this is not something that just affects individuals, it affects everybody. And I really do hope that people will read it and they will take something away from it.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, Neetu. I appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me.